Happy week 10, everybody. It is the Audible, footballguys.com. Sigmund Bloom here with Dr. Jene Bramel and Chris Allen. And first, we're going to go around the league, some injury situations, Dr. Jene. And it looks like the Cardinals are going to be prudent and keep their stars sitting for one more week as they face PJ Walker today and the Panthers.
Yeah, I hope it's prudent. If it's prudent, that means they'll be back next week and we won't see them miss through the bye. I think there's a chance, particularly with Hopkins, that we may not see him until beyond their week 12 bye out in Arizona. Murray, sounded optimistic. They allowed him to continue to talk to the media. He said he made crazy strides Tuesday into Wednesday, but really wasn't able to do all that much. And, if Murray isn't going to be able to do much more than just throw the ball from the pocket and Hopkins isn't there for him, it probably does make sense to be prudent there. But I'm not entirely convinced yet that these injuries are going to be something that the players can play next week. So hopefully that'll prove to be the case. I think Murray has a better chance than Hopkins.
Hey, Dr. Gene. So for Chris Godwin, I know he's expected to play today. With this foot injury, should we expect normal complement of snaps, reduced workload? I mean, what should we expect going into today?
Yeah, I have no idea. So I think there's an argument that Godwin played 97% of the snaps in week 8. They knew that Antonio Brown is weeks away from playing. Rob Gronkowski had something more than back spasms, and they just decided that they were going to take it very easy with Godwin, knowing that Scotty Miller wasn't ready to come back yet. Tyler Johnson was there. Not sure what they got with O.J. Howard. Maybe they're just going to run the ball, those sorts of things. And that really all they wanted to see was a little bit of work on Friday. And then there's not going to be that much difference in usage and targets and expectation for him. But you didn't really get that tone from Bruce Arians through the course of the week. So I'm a little bit skeptical, but it's certainly possible that he plays every snap, gets double-digit targets, and plays very well today. I just don't know that that's something that we can count on because we don't have enough information to go by. And we have no clue what the foot injury is, whether it's something small or he's got a little bit of a toe tweak or something like that. There's so many different things that could go on. We're probably not going to find out until after the game or Monday.
Gene, we hear about James Robinson. He can't make it worse. I'm not really sure how that changed between last week and this week. He can't make it worse. That's not a guarantee he's going to play. There's lots of fantasy layers to this too, because it's the Jags against the Colts. But from the medical side, based on what we know, how does that affect his outlook if he is indeed active?
It's confusing a little bit to me. If it's something that he can't aggravate and it's a pain tolerance issue, there are probably ways around them allowing him to play. So I don't know that jives perfectly with what you would expect. Now, we've been told all along that it's a bruise in the heel. I suppose if you hit that in the wrong way, or if it's something, close to the heel bone there, that you could make it worse. So I don't know. I think the tone of even though Urban Meyer's tried to be pretty positive about it, we don't have a long enough history with Urban Meyer to know whether or not what he says is meaningful with injuries or not. So I'm leaning towards Robinson not playing. If he does, maybe double digit touches, but I think that would be a ceiling, kind of that 10 to 12 range. But I think based on what we've heard and based on the fact that he's already missed a week of play, probably going to see another week of Carlos Hyde, and hopefully Robinson is back fully healthy next week.
I want to try and walk folks through like any sort of expectations for the Cowboys passing game. So we've got Amari Cooper, he's been cleared to play. CeeDee Lamb cleared to play. But Michael Gallup, we're expecting him to be activated today, and also Cedric Wilson with the shoulder injury. Like those two guys are the two that I have the biggest questions about. And Dr. Gene, should we expect both of them to play? And for both of them, I mean, what's your level of expectation for either of them?
I don't know what to expect with Wilson. Earlier in the week, I felt like, well, we may not see him. Sounds like a little bit more of a significant injury than what was originally reported. But he was able to practice. Sounds like he's trending towards playing. I think you're going to see Wilson and Gallup sort of mix in a small percentage of plays, small percentage of packages for each. Lamb and Cooper look like they're going to be on the injury report off and on for a while since they did so coming out of the bye week. Neither one of those injuries seems too concerning. I don't think you're going to see Gallup for more than 20 or 30 snaps. I wouldn't guess. I wouldn't expect too many targets for him. And Wilson's going to see the same amount of snaps he probably has been from the beginning since Gallup was out.
Thankfully, Doc, you are always working hard for us. There's not a lot, at least, affecting lineup decisions today on the injury front. I do want to ask you about something going forward. No Alvin Kamara this week. Hasn't exactly been a good indicator whether players are put on IR or not. He wasn't put on IR, no big deal. But what do we think about Kamara, just based on what we know, his outlook for next week against Philadelphia?
Yeah, hopefully today goes smoothly, but this week is going to be all about, another run of probably 6 to 8 guys with longer term concerns. We're not sure, as we get closer and closer to the playoff weeks, are they going to be back for the stretch run? Are we waiting to see them for the playoffs? Could they recover in any sort of meaningful capacity at all? With Kamara, I think it's reasonable to expect a short term absence with him. He was able to come back and play through that MCL sprain a little bit last week, but these are injuries, especially in high performance players, where if they feel a little bit of stiffness or on the other side of the spectrum a little bit of looseness in the joint, it's probably not a great idea for them to play because they're not going to be able to do everything they could do. They may be at a little bit higher risk of either aggravating that sprain or putting a different structure at risk a little bit. But the tone of what we heard doesn't suggest that this is a longer term injury. And as you said, they didn't choose to put him on IR yesterday, as teams so often do at the end of the week when they have to make their final roster decision. So I'm not saying that means he's going to be back next week, but I don't think this is going to turn into a 4 to 6 week MCL sprain where we're going to be wondering come week 3 on IR whether or not he's going to be on the active roster, whether or not the team should have put him on IR like Rob Gronkowski or Antonio Brown or others over the course of the week. So hopefully he's back next week, but it was pretty clear undercurrent that when he was evaluated on Monday that he probably wasn't going to play. We talked about that on Thursday night with everything that Nick Underhill had been saying locally that wasn't likely for him to be able to go. So I think we're going to get a pretty good clue from those same reporters early next week, whether or not he's going to be able to go.
I guess kind of building off that, like just one more real quick, Dr. Gene. So with this whole Julio Jones thing, I mean, should they have done this earlier? It just seems like with him being in and out in the lineup for so many weeks, he's missed games. Would you consider this a setback and then wanting to shut him down just to make sure that they have him for whatever playoff run they might have? Or what's your intuition with them doing this so quickly?
Well, my intuition, not to be flip, is that he could have been put on injured reserve in 2019. I mean, this has been going on since that time frame, and we knew it was a pretty significant hamstring strain then. And, when folks ask us, are players injury prone? The answer is yes. We just don't really know who they are. So probably something going on in this hamstring tissue where he's got some scarring. It's in an area where just a big problem. And, Jones tries to play through these injuries. You can see that, he feels like he can manage it even if he's not 100%. So they put him on the field and he's not healed. So he's chronically at risk of aggravation, especially if this is in an area or has a soft tissue situation that just isn't really going to heal. And I think at his age, with the length of time that this has been going on, they can put him on injured reserve and try to get him as calmed down as possible. But this particular issue has been going on probably even before the preseason, but we know it was an issue early in the preseason. Basically, he got to training camp and he was already being limited alongside AJ Brown. It was because of a hamstring thing. And we've not been told that it's something different. It's probably the same injury. So 3 weeks is not going to do it. So he's one of these players where, yes, you would expect that. Let's give him as much time as possible, as long as we're playing well. And we don't need striving for a bye or striving for a division championship or something like that. Give him as long as possible, manage him as long as possible, so that you hope that he's in good a spot come playoff time as possible. So I would be surprised if this is a 3-week situation. This is one of those where you could easily see it go 4, 6, 8 weeks, depending on how the team plays and how he feels, because they've been without him for much of the year. Absolutely, they could use him, but they're going to want him in week 16, 17 in the playoffs rather than week 12, 13 of the regular season.
Well, Doc, I hope that next week our segment with you is just as short because I know you've been working overtime. I have one last quick question for you. When an offensive lineman touches the football, great play or greatest play?
Well, my first love is on the defensive side of the ball, so I'm always here for big man touchdowns. So greatest.
Yeah, even if they don't count. Even if they don't count.
It is still
in our hearts.
In his
it counts.
Not in mind, it's going to count forever. So even if it's not part of the play-by-play game log on his Pro Football Reference page, it still counts.
And Dr. Gene's great advice always counts, helps us count more points in our fantasy lineups. Doc, we always appreciate your time.
Always, guys. See ya. Have a good week.
I just had to go back to that, Chris, because the reaction of the players, the reaction of players on social media, the reaction, watch a lot of football with my wife. And we go back to that Marshall Newhouse play. Remember when Marshall Newhouse went spinning in the air?
Oh, yeah.
It's just, it releases such joy and enthusiasm that it got the wheels in my head turning about. They have to find a way to make this a regular part of NFL games, right?
Yeah.
I thought like maybe like 1 or 2 play games, you have to make a starting offensive lineman your quarterback, or maybe swap the skill players in the offensive linemen. Someone brought up a great idea, and I even added Roger Goodell on it, that you can have a 3-point conversion if your offensive linemen are playing the skill position.
Oh, hey, now I like that.
See, right? Yeah. I mean, genuinely, I'm not just kidding. Wouldn't it make the game more fun and increase interest in the game if they added some fun like that? Because you could just feel that. I mean, there was a bigger reaction to Robert Hunt. Folks don't know what I'm talking about. Robert, look up Robert Hunt, Raging Cajun. There was such a reaction. There was about as big a reaction to that play, Chris. And maybe it was because it was in just such a miserable Thursday night game.
Right.
But there's gold there. There's gold there to mine. And wouldn't it be great to start an offensive lineman in your fantasy lineup, right?
I mean, I think that'd be fun.
Right? For years, we've been looking for a way for offensive linemen to figure into fantasy football other than the way they help their players. All right, let's get this going. Thanks for the patience, everyone. On the last week, I was on assignment. And this week, I think that the time got set a couple hours early. I think there were some people here in the chat room a couple hours ago. Sorry about that. We're always starting at 10 a.m. Eastern on Sundays, and we'll be here for the rest of the season. But let's go ahead and start some of these questions. John Thompson was in there right away. Assuming James Robinson's active, him or Nyheim Hines. Now, Hines had a great week last week. We're going to wait and see if Marlon Mack is active, because it seems like that might be one of the skeleton keys to deciding at least if Hines is viable. But is James Robinson a good enough option to say, even if Mack is inactive, you're going to go with an active Robinson over Hines?
Yeah, I think so. Just given how little Carlos Hyde produced in his absence, and then also what we're thinking about the projected game flow for the Colts today as they play against Jacksonville. I mean, if we're already thinking that Jonathan Taylor is already such a strong play, how much the Colts lean on Jonathan Taylor, once they get in those positive game scripts. I mean, do you really see a situation where Indianapolis is going to be coming from behind against Jacksonville, necessitating more touches for Hines? I'm just not seeing it. And I know while that's famous last words, it's there's no way that almost like we said almost on Thursday, there's no way that the Dolphins could wind up beating the Ravens. So I mean, anything can happen on a Sunday, but just from the way that I see that game projecting, it seems like more of a move to wind up using James Robinson versus banking on any sort of game flow that would involve Nyheim Hines.
And I think that James Robinson has just risen to the level as one of those players that if you're in a close decision, just play James Robinson. He deserves our trust. Considering what he's done, what he's rode upstream against. Dane M asks, actually, there's 3 quarterbacks here. Teddy Bridgewater against the Eagles, which have allowed 80+% completion rate games in 9 games, tying an NFL record through 9 games. Matt Ryan plays the Dallas Cowboys, and then he added in Mike White, who, all he's done is had a 400-yard game. And then last week, his pass offense had another 400-yard game. Who do we like out of these streamers?
I would say that while it might sound a bit gross, I'm leaning more towards Matt Ryan. I'd probably say Matt Ryan and Teddy Bridgewater are in their own tier, maybe kind of side by side, and Mike White is just slightly below that. While I do think that Mike White has at least enough, the passing volume has certainly been there, and we can definitely see the pass volume getting there today as they're playing against Buffalo, because assuming that that's a get right spot for Josh Allen, Steph Diggs, and the rest of them, that would put them in a situation where Mike White is going to continue those lower ADOT throws that he was using while he was still active. I think he had a 4.2 ADOT or something, really short. So that's great. I mean, that's the volume that's the volume we want, or the types of passes we want in order to get to, whether it's Corey Davis now that he's supposed to be back, Michael Carter, whomever, they can wind up getting that yards after the catch. But with Teddy Bridgewater, I mean, we saw the possible ceiling, or at the very least a stable floor for when they were playing against Dallas last week. And I think Philadelphia's defense, while Darius Slay has been shutting down perimeter receivers, like Cortland Sutton, I mean, that's pretty much going to be his day. But Jerry Jeudy is going to be there. Tim Patrick, we're expecting him to go. Noah Fant, assuming he's going to be back today as well. There's enough there that I think Teddy Bridgewater offers at least a little bit more upside without having at least as downtrodden of a matchup as Mike White has against Buffalo. So I'd put Teddy B ahead of him. Matt Ryan also ahead of them, assuming that we've got at least a better showing from Dallas's offense today. So if that's the case, I would put those two ahead of Mike White and kind of like pick your poison between like
Right.
JB and Matt Ryan.
I think that if you need 25 or 30 points out of that spot, then go with Mike White and hope for the best. I think you're right to put him third in the sense that he could turn back into a pumpkin this week. Now, with Matt Ryan and Teddy, what I find interesting about these games are, first of all, you have the Broncos finally sticking with the run and beating the Cowboys, Ryan's opponent today. And also Pat Shurmur, I think, is out for this one on the COVID list. And Cecil would bemoan week after week after week that Pat Shurmur would abandon the run. So does that mean that Denver really goes with the running game in this one against Philadelphia, who's also not great against the run, but Philadelphia's weakness is obviously against the pass, and Darius Slay is banged up too. Now on the Matt Ryan side, again, Denver had all that success running the ball against Dallas last week. Atlanta doesn't exactly have a robust running game, but you never know. And then again, Mike White and the Jets, fun sideshow. So, and this is where we're at, quarterback has been a little thinner. So I think more people are streaming quarterbacks than we might expect. Okay, this is one of the players that's going to have, two of these players, a lot of questions, but one of them especially, Precision 340 asks, Zach Moss or Ramondre Stevenson? I'm going to set this up a little bit because Moss, both of these players coming off of concussions last week. Moss got out of the protocol a little bit earlier than Stevenson. I think Stevenson, if this was a road game, we might not be seeing Stevenson, but because it's a home game, he got cleared by the independent neurologist yesterday. So you have the Bills against the Jets, and the Bills are coming off a game against the Jags where they maybe got the message that they need to be able to run the ball, that they need to not allow a defense like the Jags to get comfortable in that cover too. And then you have the Patriots. Now, as soon as you say Patriots running back, Chris, everyone thinks Bill Belichick. He's going to play. It's trick or treat. I know it's saying Halloween was a couple weeks ago, but he's going to play some sort of joke on us. Ramondre Stevenson has not practiced all week. That's not always a good sign. The other side of this, though, is it is Cleveland. Now, Cleveland's not necessarily a poor defense against the run, but it is a game that you would think that the Patriots, as they've done all year, are going to try to have a conservative offense. They're going to lean on the running game. Stevenson can do things in the passing game. And the upside is there for Stevenson, although Stevenson also, he may only touch the ball once or twice because Bill Belichick. So if you had to make this call between Moss and Stevenson, and also just give folks a general guidance on both of these guys, because I'm getting a ton of questions. It's the backup running back week or injured running back week or running backs that we have questions about week. These are two with big question marks.
Right. And I think that it could be just as simple as which running back is attached to the better offense. And I think that's an easier starting spot, right? Because we can at least know that, at least we can assume, especially after last week, that the Buffalo Bills are the better offense and also who has the better matchup. I mean, the Jets run defense, while it has been fairly stout, at least during the earlier parts of the season, not so great over the past few weeks. So I think just from a matchup and general offensive schematic perspective, I would lean more towards Zach Moss, in this case. Now, you could talk yourself into just what we saw out of Ramondre Stevenson over the past couple of weeks, especially before he went down. He had 50, 60 yards or something like that on that one drive, and then was Damian Harris the one that wound up getting the touchdown. So we know that he has that type of upside. But I would say that from a simplistic standpoint, knowing that at the very least, Zach Moss, while he also hasn't practiced this week, he also seems to be more in sync with this quarterback, used a bit more in the passing game over the past few weeks as well. I would lean more towards and he also has the better matchup, as I mentioned beforehand. I would lean more towards Zach Moss. But if you are looking for that punch, and while I understand that, especially with Bellatrix possibly being involved here, I would say that if you do need that punch, I could see leaning towards Ramondre Stevenson, but it's Zach Moss for me.
Yeah, so the way I answered this question, I got the exact same question on Twitter earlier this morning. I said, I'm going to roll the dice with Moss. Now, again, if you need it, let's say you started Mike Gesicki and you already got a 0, and you need upside, then Stevenson probably has more upside. Although Moss has had a couple of 2-touchdown games in this one, and it is the Jets. Chris Moore's got 3 different questions here. We'll step through each of them. Non-PPR, Knox or Freiermuth, although non-PPR doesn't change this one. And I just want to toss another name in here that I'm getting questions that are variations with 2 of these 3 names: Knox, Freiermuth, and Dalton Schultz. Now Freiermuth, Knox back off of IR, but not on the injury report with that hand injury, and hand injury means he's in football shape. Like I don't think there's a chance when the player's coming back from a soft tissue injury, then there's some re-aggravation or reconditioning. You never know. Freiermuth has to catch passes from Mason Rudolph, as Ben Roethlisberger yesterday goes on the COVID list. Interesting story too is he was experiencing symptoms, self-reported, self-tested because
oh wow.
Yeah, so Roethlisberger.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Dalton Schultz, as we're seeing Dallas coming off of quite possibly the worst game. I don't know statistically it was the worst game of Dak Prescott's career, but it was certainly one of the worst games of his career. Who stands out among these mid-tier tight ends?
I would say out of the mid-tier tight ends, Freiermuth still sticks out, not just because obviously we say that qualitatively moving from Ben Roethlisberger to Mason Rudolph is a bad thing, but apparently like Vegas doesn't like agree too much with that.
A point and a half.
Yeah, I remember seeing a tweet from like last night. It was like when Russell Wilson went out, like it shifted 6 points.
7,
Aaron Rodgers
6,
went out, so yeah, 6, 7 as well, and then Ben Roethlisberger goes out. It's like a point and a half. Like offensive linemen have shifted.
We just don't want to hurt Ben's feelings. Vegas doesn't want to hurt his feelings.
Yeah.
So a point. Yeah, it matters. A point. A point
matters.
Sure.
It matters. Yeah, there you go. You get that at least. But no, I would say that Mason Rudolph, while at the very least a draw, if you want to go compare him to Ben Roethlisberger, passing rate. Like I looked at his starting, the stats when he was a starter during the 2019 season. Most of the passing rates essentially stayed the same, so the opportunity should be there. He's also without Chase Claypool today as well. So it's really just Deontay Johnson, it's Pat Freiermuth, it's James Washington, Najee Harris. I mean, so the passing tree is already condensed as well. So I would honestly still think of Pat Freiermuth almost the same way as if Ben Roethlisberger was playing at this point. Where would we rank him? If you want to move him down a spot, okay, fine. But because of the unknown with Mason Rudolph coming in and starting today, but still, I mean, looking at how he's been used over the past couple of weeks, not just between the 20s, but also in the red zone as well. I would still put Freiermuth ahead of Knox just because of Knox coming off of the injury. So I'd say just for this week alone, yeah, sure, put Pat Freiermuth ahead. After this week, we'll see how Dawson Knox gets reintegrated back into the offense and then take it from there. So I might put Knox ahead of him next week, but for this week, yeah, I think I still lean towards Freiermuth.
See, having to say Freiermuth every week, Chris, it's going to turn us into Germans.
Yeah.
We're going to say everything with a German accent. Yeah, and I didn't change Freiermuth's projection at all. If anything, it may make you more likely to play James Washington, of course, who was Mason Rudolph's #1 man at Oklahoma State. So there's some connection there. And it's the Lions. The other side of it is it's the Lions. You might say, come on, Dawson Knox, it's the Jets. Well, it's the Lions. Any thoughts you want to add on Dalton Schultz, as Michael Gallup will be back this week? And we know that Dallas, whenever they have things on track, really only want to pass the ball about 25 times a game, but sometimes 8 or 9 of those have been to Schultz.
I'm just wondering now with Michael Gallup coming back, even as Dr. Gene said, we can't expect a ton back from them. Let's see how much more often Dak is going to be looking for that third wide receiver versus using either of the either tight end. Well, actually, since it's just Schultz now, it's the only game in town at the tight end position. But I think for the first 4 or 5 weeks, when Gallup was out, we started to see the tight ends involved more. But now if Gallup is back, let's see if he's actually reintegrated back into that offense, and they actually wind up using those 3 wide receiver sets a bit more. I would lean more towards those targets going to those ancillary wide receivers than him. But I can understand why folks might want to at least try it for this week and see how it works. But since Cedric Wilson and Gallup are kind of banged up, so I get it though.
Okay, half PPR. Chris Moore asks, and again, I like picking out these questions to give us players to talk about. You have Devontae Smith. Now, Devontae Smith has been up and down, but coming off of an up game, and this is with the new run first Eagles offense. So maybe fewer targets can mean more efficiency, better opportunities for him. And Van Jefferson, oh man, what a week for the Rams. They sign Odell Beckham and lose Robert Woods in the same day, which obviously they're talking about using Beckham as a punt returner, a package of plays for Beckham. So that sure sounds like Van Jefferson is a clear top 2 receiver. Not that he wasn't on the field 90% of the plays anyway coming into this one, but now there'll be more targets for him. Do you go with Devontae Smith coming off the big game, or do you go with Van Jefferson? And just for folks with other or Van Jefferson kind of questions, what are your guiding light notes here?
I do lean towards Van Jefferson. Like, I get why, like Devontae Smith, he not only did he have a great game like last week, this week, but against Denver, we actually didn't talk to Dr. Cheney about this, even though it's a more defensive question, but Patrick Surtain's supposed to be out this week, if I'm remembering correctly. So that should make things a little bit easier for him, but you do lay out the Eagles offense correctly. Their pass rate over expectation has been down almost the past like 4 or 5 weeks, as they've now like created this new identity for themselves where it's we'll run, put Jalen Hurts in better passing situations, allow him to at least, improve in terms of where he's at like as a passer, even though like that's been somewhat shaky, like even as of over the past like few weeks. But now I would lean more towards Van Jefferson, already attached to a better quarterback in Matthew Stafford. The Rams pass rate over expectation has been like top 2, top 3 over the league, like over the entire season so far. And without Robert Woods now, I can't even believe like Robert Woods, he finished practice with a torn ACL, like, which is absolutely wild to me. But still, now with OBJ being eased in, I saw reports earlier this morning about him, like talks of him being used as a punt returner, maybe mixed in on a few plays here or there. We'll see if Sean McVay is more just playing coy than anything else. But I would say that Van Jefferson for this week, as they're still sorting through the injury, Odell Beckham's arrival, like he'd be the one I choose.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me at all to see Beckham have some big plays tomorrow night against the 49ers. Like you said, playing coy McVay, because isn't the best part of acquiring Beckham what he and Stafford can do outside of structure, what they can do when you're just playing sandlot football? And
could you not just see a red zone package, like similar to what Robert Woods did with that jet sweep type of thing? Because what type of, all you really need is to just make sure you're there when the ball is snapped. That doesn't require a ton of practice, at least I wouldn't assume. So I could see a goal line or like a red zone package where it's just him streaking across the formation, takes the snap, and then runs it in for like a 10-yard touchdown, something like that, which Robert Woods used to do anyway.
Right. It'll be really interesting to see, just as an aside, what McVay does with Beckham and how they christen the Beckham era, even if it is a short-lived era, because they're going for the Super Bowl. And there's obviously a volatility to, it's real interesting. Mike Reese. I love Mike Reese. Really, if I was doing a beat writer power ranking, he might be number 1. And in his notes this morning, he said something that was very pregnant. He said something like, regardless, it might be best for the Patriots after all. He talked about how there was excitement. The players were thinking maybe we're going to get Beckham with the Patriots. He said, regardless, it might be better for the Patriots after all, the outcome. So, but what that means is there's a volatility there. To bringing Beckham into the locker room and putting him on the field, and how will Sean McVay handle that? And one way to do that, like you said, is get him involved, get the ball in his hands in these high leverage situations. But watch them fake it to Beckham, because everyone will expect him to get the ball and just throw a little touchdown to Tyler Higbee, right? Last one, Chris, and this is just a chance. It's Chris Moore, so it's a more. He says Nyheim Hines or Elijah Moore in a full PPR. Every single question I've got this week, Chris, that it has Elijah Moore as an option. The answer has been Elijah Moore.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I remember, mutual friend Matt Harmon talking about afterwards, looking at like his tape over the past couple of weeks. If the Jets aren't looking for ways to get him more involved at this point, regardless of what we're assuming for them at the quarterback position, we don't know like what they're going to expect for Zach Wilson after he's healthy and he comes back. But if they don't continue to get him more involved, like moving forward, I don't know what they're thinking. We've already seen it over the past few weeks. So yeah, it's more for me. Absolutely.
And the Elijah Moore 2021 story is going to be a reminder. There was so much excitement about him in the offseason and preseason. Then he got hurt. Then he started to not really play very much when he was healthy enough to play, and getting involved in the offense at a very minimal amount. And then even I think in his first game that he was fantasy relevant, he played like 30 or 40% of the snaps. He had like 6 for 78. Oh, it was, it's garbage time. Mike White, I think it was the Bengals game actually. And then last week it was garbage time. But you bring up a good point that with Matt Harmon, bringing up that they have to get him more involved.
Yes.
And so it would certainly equal a lot more points for fantasy teams, especially against Buffalo this week, because you would think that Tre'Davious White is going to be locked up with Corey Davis, who is going to be back out there. Okay, a couple of interesting players to bring up here in Tony 42K's question. Half-point PPR needs to sit one. Justin Jefferson against the Chargers. A.J. Brown against the Saints. And what's going to be interesting about this one is, first of all, A.J. Brown could see Marshawn Lattimore. Second of all, we already saw coming into the season last year that there was talk that A.J. Brown is going to have to learn how to beat double coverage. They're going to have to do things with A.J. Brown. So this is a challenge now with Julio Jones on IR. All of the attention. There's nobody else in this pass offense that is threatening whatsoever. And now there's no Derrick Henry.
Right.
So is it just that easy to hem in the Titans offense? Mike Williams against Minnesota, who's coming off of 4 out of 5 duds in the last 5 games. And then Cordero Patterson. I have a pretty good feeling, Chris, that Jefferson and Patterson are in, at least for me. It comes down to Brown with his conundrum of how do you get open? How do you get him the ball, knowing that he's the only real threat against a good Saints defense, especially a good Saints run defense. So they're going to have to throw. Maybe that's a good thing. And then Mike Williams, he of the up and down scoring profile. What say you?
I 100% agree. I mean, Justin Jefferson, Cordero Patterson, I mean, those are 2 like critical pieces like to their respective offenses. So yeah, you're starting those 2. And I think it can be just as simple as what you laid out. I mean, with the Titans, like even if he is like the number one wide receiver for them, if he moves to the outside, he's going to be facing Marshawn Lattimore. That they've moved him into the slot. I think he's had like a 25% like slot rate like over the past like month or so. So he can move into the slot in order to get like more of those higher percentage targets, but that's not going to wind up getting you at least all the way down the field in order for him to get those money touches. Like, can we really see him ascending to getting the same heights as any of the other guys that we've talked about? I mean, Mike Williams, we already know he's had like this massive ceiling over the earlier like 4 to 6 weeks of the season. And now for this game against the Vikings, we've seen them give up like big plays. We've seen them give up explosive plays to like receivers in the past. So while Keenan Allen has been the one to get like most of the targets over the past like couple of weeks, I can see this being a big day for both. I mean, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. So out of all of those guys, I would probably wind up sitting A.J. Brown and just starting all the rest of them. I'm really big on Mike Williams, Justin Jefferson, obviously, Cordero Patterson for sure. So I'll probably take those guys and while it sounds bad, I mean, leaving out, I mean, one of the top receivers, not just in Tennessee's offense, but in the league. It does sound bad, but I lean more towards those 3.
Yeah, lots of interesting stuff to tease out here. But of course, the NFL, we know it's like a sandcastle, Chris. And like next week, it might have got swept back into the NFL Ocean, and there's something new for us to analyze. That Cardinals offense is one to analyze. We've gotten a couple of questions. There's one that is Kirk a must start now. Andrew Goodman asks in 0.5 PPR, Kirk or Judy. Again, we have Colt McCoy likely starting. We have no DeAndre Hopkins. What do we think of Christian Kirk tomorrow night? And as a counterpoint, Jerry Jeudy now in his 2nd week back in the Broncos offense.
I would lean more towards Jerry Jeudy because, as we were talking about earlier, against like Philadelphia's defense, like that is a defense while perimeter receivers have had a pretty tough go against them, especially with Darius Slay like playing so well this season. But it's that interior part of the field, like that's where you want to try and beat them up as much. And with Tim Patrick being somewhat banged up, I would lean more towards Jeudy this week. Noah Fant, assuming he goes, he'd be the primary beneficiary for that sort of defensive setup. But I do lean more towards Jerry Jeudy in this. And like between those 2, I think I understand like why folks would want to try and at least go towards him over Kirk. Like while Kirk is probably like the only game in town from a receiving perspective, like Carolina's defense is good. I mean, they played well over the past like few weeks,
especially against the pass.
Right, exactly. And so like while Colt McCoy was able to capture some magic with the rest of the backups last week, I'm not expecting that to happen again, especially in this matchup. I mean, going up against a much more stout defense versus like San Francisco's defense that's been banged up. So no, I would lean more towards Jeudy like over Kirk, regardless of what happened last week.
All right. I want to touch on a few other players, not necessarily in the context of a start sit question, but just to get your thoughts here. What do we think of Alex Collins this week? Chris Carson not activated. So Alex Collins, as much as the Seahawks have a lead back, he is the guy. Russell Wilson is also back, but this game is at Green Bay. There's snow. Maybe, Alex Collins got some snow tires. A.J. Dillon's got some snow tires. You can talk about A.J. Dillon too if you want. In this game, Seattle Green Bay has given us some memorable games during the Wilson and Rodgers era. What do we have in store for these number 2 running backs, in Collins' case, number 2 cast as a number 1 today?
Yeah, I saw folks chirping about the snow in Green Bay, and I saw actually the pictures of it there this morning. So that's what the late game of 4:05, 4:25 kickoff. Snow is not expected there. Like by that time, it'll clear out like well beforehand. And actually, Green Bay, like Lambeau Field, is one of the few fields that actually has like heated pipes underneath the field in order to make sure like all of that accumulation is gone by the time kickoff starts. So I have no concerns from a weather perspective, like for the snow, other than just being cold. Okay, that's about it.
Right.
Which players can deal with that anyway. So I have no concerns about the weather impacting this particular game. But regardless, for Chris Carson being out, Alex Collins being in, Green Bay, they've been middle of the pack in terms of adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. And with Russell Wilson coming back, I mean, we're all looking at DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. Hopefully, like Collins can get involved as a receiver. I haven't really seen a ton of targets that go his way, but it's Geno Smith. Like, what can we really expect anyway? But at least, from the very least, like the workload and opportunity, let's think of a path where, I mean, Pete Carroll doesn't want to wind up making Russ like push himself in his first game back. We could see them lean a bit more, like Pete Carroll having more of an imprint on the offense for this week with Russ returning. So yeah, I mean, I'm all about like having Alex Collins like play in this game, but we already expect it to be somewhat of a slow game anyway. The Seahawks play slow. Green Bay, like they play slow but efficient. Let's see if Rodgers is back and 100% back after being on the COVID list for the last like 10 days. Let's say even if he comes out like a little bit rusty as well, that could be one of those like slower games to start off where Alex Collins could be the beneficiary of it. So yeah, I'm with that.
Yeah, I love the way you sum this up, that it's going to be a slow game. It's going to be a slow game, folks. It's going to be a low-scoring game. I would think both quarterbacks I would fix at about 25 pass attempts. So not so much, obviously Adams and Lockett and Metcalf are in your lineups, but I think this is going to be a 17-14 kind of game, as both of these coaches' comfort zone is a run-first offense, run to set up the pass. Even though these are world-class quarterbacks, I don't think that we're going to see a lot. Another running back I want to touch on, again, one of the backup running backs that's starting today, Mark Ingram. We already laid out on the Titans side how we could throw Jeremy McNichols and Adrian Peterson in here if we want to. On the Titans side, the Titans offense looks easy to defend, but what does that make the Saints offense with Trevor Siemian and no Alvin Kamara? Is this just a game where you want to have the fantasy defenses? Where does Mark Ingram fall on the continuum of all these backup running backs that were pressed into fantasy duty this week?
I mean, I the only way that I can see him getting there is just on like if you're starting him in a PPR league, because at least with Trevor Siemian, we knew that there was going to be some targets there, whether it been Alvin Kamara or whatever. Because over the past couple of weeks, Ingram had I think like 2 targets and 5 targets in his first couple of games, like back in New Orleans. So we already saw like his involvement at the very least in the passing game starting to ramp up. Now, if it had been Taysom Hill starting this week, all bets would have been off regarding like either Kamara or Ingram's involvement in the passing game. So with Siemian, you can at least bank on a few targets getting there. If I'm remembering correctly, and I heard this like early in the week, David Long, one of the linebackers for Tennessee, he's also supposed to be out. So that could at least make the sledding a bit easier for Mark Ingram. So while Tennessee has been one of the tougher defenses to run on, I mean, how many attempts between like Darrell Henderson and Sony Michel do we see like them just pounding into that line and really not getting a ton of push on them this past week? So I can understand like why folks might want to shy away from Ingram, especially with Siemian, especially with that matchup. But at the very least, if you are starting him in a PPR league, I think those targets will be enough for him to be okay. Like 8, 9, 10 points. If he needs like a safe floor, I think that's well within the range of outcomes, like for Ingram, and then a chance for a touchdown. Hey, if we see Siemian pop up for a decent game like he did, a couple of weeks ago when he was pulled into starting after Jameis Winston went down, so much the better. I think he could be the beneficiary of that. So I think Ingram is okay, but I'm not expecting a ton.
Yeah, like 14 carries for 40 yards, maybe a touchdown. Where he might hit for you is 6 catches for 25 yards.
Yeah, exactly.
And scratch out a 13 or 14 point kind of PPR game for you. Kate, want to ask, I want to get your thoughts here. We talked about Eno Benjamin already. Now, I think from a fantasy standpoint, Eno Benjamin is still below all these running backs we've been talking about. He's more on the level of an Adrian Peterson. I actually think Jeremy McNichols might catch 7 or 8 or 9 balls. I think he had 8 catch game earlier this year. I mean, he's one of the only guys Tannehill trusts. So, and again, it's the Saints. You can't run on the Saints. So Jeremy McNichols, maybe a cheap 15-point PPR kind of player, maybe more this week. Anyway, Eno Benjamin, what are your thoughts on him? And one of the other things I know someone in the chat room was asking about this, those Sunday morning transactions, right? You have a little more clarity. And one of the things, especially I like to do at this time of year, is if a player can't gain value this week, then on my bench, I'd rather swap them out for someone who can, like Eno Benjamin. What do you think his outlook is for this week if someone has to put him in a pinch? And is he a player you would be targeting now with Chase Edmonds on IR as one of those high upside, injury upside backups you put on your bench?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I was kind of surprised last week, and maybe this was just because everything just seemed to be clicking on offense. And what's the age-old adage? Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of thing. I was surprised that he wasn't really used all that much as a receiver. It was just all running for him. Even though coming out of college, he was averaging like 40 receptions like per year or something like that. I mean, he profiles as a pass catching back. So we would have I would have expected to see James Conner being the one used on early downs as soon as Chase Edmonds went down, and then Eno Benjamin mixing in on third downs. And I was expecting Eno Benjamin to be the one to have, what was it, that 40, 45-yard touchdown that Conner had. Right. So, I mean, maybe with a week for them to kind of sit back and look at where they're at. Obviously, with James Conner's injury history, they probably wouldn't want to put a huge workload on him since he's pretty much like their primary back as of right now. I'm not assuming they're going to expect Eno Benjamin to be their RB1 like should James Conner go down. So I can honestly see a scenario where the kind of like what I just described, where it is James Conner kind of working in on early downs, still gets the short yardage goal line work that he's had in the entire season behind Chase Edmonds. And then afterwards, it's Eno Benjamin. That's the one that's getting the third down work, the hurry up type situations, the obvious passing down situations. I can see that happening as well. So yeah, he should definitely have been a priority pickup for most folks like in their leagues. If he's still out there, absolutely pick him up. Because in this game that they're going to be playing, on what's it? Do they have the Sunday night game or is it Monday night game? I forget. Either way. In the game that they're going to be playing against Carolina, that's going to be one where at the very least we can see them having a bit tough sledding for James Conner playing like running against their rush defense. And so then Colt McCoy might have to turn to Eno Benjamin in the passing game. So I could see it happening. Yeah.
And with Conner, always remember, Steelers fan, this is kind of painful because it's why he's not on the team. He just couldn't stay healthy when he was a lead back. And you wonder, so there's 2 different paths to value here for Eno Benjamin. One is that the Cardinals are wise and still only use, I know last week they treated him as more of a feature back. I think that the game script also helped them feed the running game, but maybe try to limit him to 15, 18 touches. And Eno Benjamin really slots right into Chase Edmonds' role. Like you said, Chris, Eno Benjamin's the guy with the profile to take that screen pass to the house. Not that Conner is a bad receiver or bad after the catch. It's just more of Benjamin's game. Right. Again, if they do decide to overwork Conner, well, that's a bit of a judgment by using that word. If they give Conner like 20 plus carries and then he comes out of this with an injury, because the thing about Conner is once that injury seal is broken, it's really hard for him to get fully healthy again. Yeah. One other backup running back, as we're getting ready to wind up here with the Sunday morning starts. Thanks everyone for turning out. And what I really love seeing, Chris, is I try to answer as many questions as I can while you're giving your insight. But the people in the chat room are also helping each other out, which is awesome.
I see that.
We love the community, man. We love the community here. What about Darrell Williams? Doesn't look like Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to get activated for this game tonight. Chiefs, Raiders, and it's a new look Chiefs that try to put together 8-minute drives. You would imagine a big part of that is Darrell Williams.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we talked about this maybe a few weeks ago when it was the larger question was like, is the Chiefs offense broken? Like, what do they need? They needed some sort of systematic shift in how they do offense, how they run their offense, because Patrick Mahomes not being able to take those home run shots, like they need to be hitting singles instead of trying to take that home run shot to Tyreek Hill. And that has to involve the running backs. I think Darrell Williams and also Darrell Williams, or whether it's Gore, whether it's Jerick McKinnon. I mean, the running back position as a whole over the past few weeks, they've been getting like more and more targets. I've noticed that as a part of an uptick in the way that Patrick Mahomes has been distributing his passes, because he really can't rely on anybody else outside of Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. So yeah, I'm 100% in on Darrell Williams, like for like in their matchup against the Raiders. They've actually played them tough, like pretty much over the past couple of weeks. That Derek Carr's like best performances have come against the Chiefs, and with the Chiefs defense being so bad, I can really see this being one of those like 37 or 36-33 type of knockout slugfest, like where Darrell Williams really does have like a massive involvement in the passing game. So yeah, I'm with it.
Yeah, I think Williams is basically a running back one for fantasy this week, and that's definitely a game we're going to look forward to, as both of those teams are kind of at crossroads in their season. Real quick question just for you personally, Chris, because the Bengals, your Bengals are at a crossroads in their season during the bye. So with no Bengals to fret over or focus on, tell me what's on your watch list as we get ready for a Sunday of football.
So really, it has been like a couple of weather situations that have popped up. The Green Bay situation, like we just talked about, but then also there's supposed to be like some wind, or not wind, but snow, rain, like out in Pittsburgh as well. Now, I think that with the Mason Rudolph news kind of takes like precedence over pretty much all of that. I wouldn't expect that folks to have too much of a different opinion about this game, just knowing how those two quarterbacks are going to be. What, Jared Goff against Pittsburgh, or then Mason Rudolph against like Detroit. And whatever we thought about this game going in, if the line only moved like 1.5 points, the weather's not going to change much as well. It might just exacerbate whatever negative opinions you might have had about the game going into it, like a dropped ball here, tipped pass there, slip on the field, or whatever. I mean, those things are going to happen in most games anyway. But I think that with the weather being what it is, I mean, that's probably going to wind up, bringing about like those chaotic events that we can't plan for. And it's just, should have expected that because, it's Goff or it's Mason or whatever. So I think that's where that game is pretty much going to wind up at. But I'm just hoping that it doesn't wind up getting much worse than that, like before kickoff. But I think everything else should be fine for today.
Chaotic events that we cannot plan for. That is the NFL in 2021 in a nutshell, in a week that we saw Cam Newton return, in a week that we saw Odell Beckham get a new team and one of his teammates go down for the season. We're here through it all, and we're going to keep your life jacket on. Don't go overboard. Hang on to the ship. We're going to get it support, and hopefully with the championship. And this year more than a year, Chris, I feel like teams that win fantasy championships will just feel like, well, they survived. Yes. And that's why they won the championship. You win the championship for surviving. So we're going to try to keep all of that, the oxygen, the pulse going for you here, folks. We'll be here every Sunday morning for you through the rest of the season. Thanks again for participating, for giving us all your positive energy, being part of what we do at Football Guys. We love to serve you the most because you're so classy.